Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into tonight's game, I wanted to talk about our sponsor, Enhanced Gaming. Enhanced products are focused on improving, complementing, and leveling up the gaming lifestyle. They make accessories for tabletop games like MTG, miniatures, D&D, and board games. They focus on quality and expression to elevate your gaming experience. I recently picked up their MTG Backpack playing card case. I loved its high-quality construction. It is made of a durable material and not just cheap plastic. It has rugged, high-quality zippers to ensure they won't snag or break during regular use. When using this backpack, I could tell it was made by someone who actually plays the game and uses the accessories. It has a fully customizable interior, so you can adjust it to whatever configuration you need. You can hold a few decks, a lot of decks, deck boxes of different sizes, or even an entire cube. I loved that the interior sleeve was big enough to hold my trade binder, even the big ones I carry around. It has large accessory pockets on the front so I can grab dice, coins, or extra tokens without having to open the entire bag. The card defender screen ensures that my card boxes won't shift around during travel. The defender screen also allows me to carry around loose cards without them going all over the backpack. What really sold me on the product was the thought given to carrying around your playmat. Playmats are usually an afterthought when it comes to accessories and travel cases. This gives you the room to carry around a loose playmat or even a playmat in a storage tube to ensure your playmat is fully protected and secured wherever you go. We have partnered with Enhanced Gaming for the holidays. Visit the link in the description below or use the promo code 10PWPMTG to get 10% off of your order through Christmas. Check out Enhanced Gaming today and elevate your gaming experience. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Ashani, piloting the partner pair of Pako, Arcane Retriever, and Haldan, Avid Arcanist. This deck seeks to put pressure on opponents, cast spells through its commanders, and win with Breach, Wheel Effects, and Brain Freeze. Ashani's opening hand contains a Windfall, Mana Crypt, Arcane Signet, Steam Vents, Verdant Catacombs, and his line of mulligans are Yavimaya Coast and Personal Tutor. Next, we have our Mox Pearl patron Nick, pounding Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. This deck seeks to attack opponents with small creatures and ninjas and get lots of Yuriko triggers to drain the table. Nick's opening hand contains an Underground Sea, Lotus Petal, Sunken Ruins, Misdirection, Fourth Bridge Prowler, and his London mulligans are March of Swirling Mist and Prismatic Vista. After that, we have our Mox Pearl patron Sean, piloting Tasigur the Golden Fang. This is a control deck that seeks to keep players in check, then use its commander to neoform into huge game-winning threats. Sean's opening hand contains a Sacrifice, Soul Ring, Island, Ancient Tomb, Jataxian Probe, Gemstone Caverns, and a Simic Signet. Finally, we have Noah, piloting Omnath, Locus of Creation. This deck seeks to execute one of its many layered combos, including Landfall, Breach, Oracle, and Emil plus Dockside. Noah's opening hand contains a Wooded Foothills, Arcane Signet, Birds of Paradise, Enlightened Tutor, Dragon's Rage Channeler, and his London mulligans are Muddle the Mixture and an Emil the Blessed. Without further ado, let's kick off this psychotic psychic psychosomatic pseudonym. Ashani wins the Sprite and Banana Challenge and gets to start us off. But Sean has a pregame action and puts Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Sacrifice. Ashani draws a card for turn and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts an Arcane Signet. Ashani passes. Nick draws a card for turn and casts a Lotus Petal. He casts an Ornithopter. He plays an Underground Sea for turn. He casts a Fourth Bridge Prowler. Nick passes. Sean draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Simic Signet. He pays 2 life to cast Jataxian Probe targeting Noah. He looks at Noah's hand and draws a card. Finished up, Sean ends his turn. Noah draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Savannah onto the battlefield. He casts a Birds of Paradise. Noah passes the turn. At the end of Noah's turn, Ashani cracks his Verdant Catacombs, pays a life, and fetches up a Stomping Ground onto the battlefield tapped. During its upkeep, Ashani wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Steam Vents into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Pako, Arcane Retriever. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Pako. Pako triggers, Ashani reveals a Forest, Nick reveals a Phyrexian Walker, Sean reveals a Force of Will, and Noah reveals a Phantasmal Image. Then Pako gets 2 +1/+1 counters. Then Sean takes it, and Ashani ships the turn to Nick. Nick draws and plays a Sunken Ruins. He moves to combat and attacks Ashani with Fourth Bridge Prowler and Ornithopter. Ashani declares no blocks, and in response, Nick ninjutsus in his commander, Yuriko the Tiger Shadow, bouncing Ornithopter back to his hand. Then Ashani takes the hit, Yuriko triggers, and Nick reveals an Underground River into his hand. In his second main phase, he recasts Ornithopter. Nick gives the turn to Sean. Sean draws and plays an island. He casts Carpet of Flowers. He moves to his second main phase and adds 1 black through his carpet. He delves away some of his graveyard and taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast his commander, Tasigur the Golden Fang. Sean ends his turn. Noah draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He casts a Dragon's Rage Channeler. He casts an Arcane Signet. Channeler triggers and Noah surveils, leaving it on top. Noah passes. During his upkeep, Ashani loses his mana crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and casts his other commander, Haldan, Avid Arcanist. He plays a Forest from Exile as his land for turn through Haldan. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Pako. Pako triggers and exiles Tropical Island, Cover of Darkness, Imperial Seal, and Arid Mesa. Then Pako gets 4 counters. Before damage, Sean casts March of Swirling Mist where X equals 1, phasing out Pako. In his second main phase, Ashani casts Birds of Paradise. Ashani ends his turn. Nick draws and plays an Underground River. He moves to combat and attacks Noah with Yuriko and 4th Bridge Prowler and attacks Sean with Ornithopter. They declare no blocks and, in response, Nick ninjutsus in Thousand-Faced Shadow, bouncing Ornithopter to his hand. Thousand-Faced Shadow triggers and creates a copy of 4th Bridge Prowler tapped and attacking Noah. 4th Bridge Prowler triggers and gives Birds of Paradise -1/-1, killing it. Then they all take it and Yuriko triggers twice. Nick reveals a Soul Ring into his hand with each opponent losing 1, and reveals a Mist Syndicate Naga into his hand with each opponent losing 3. In his second main phase, Nick recasts Ornithopter. Finished up, Nick passes. Sean draws, and in his first main phase, he adds 1 black through his carpet. He plays a Misty Rainforest for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He activates Tasigur, milling Exotic Orchard and Demonic Consultation, with Nick returning March of Swirling Mist to his hand. Sean passes the turn. At the end of Sean's turn, Noah casts Enlightened Tutor. Channeler triggers, and Noah surveils a Winds of Rebuke into his graveyard. He then fetches up a Rhystic Study onto the top of his library. The turn moves to Noah. Noah draws and casts Rhystic Study. Channeler triggers, and Noah surveils Chrome Mox into his graveyard. Noah passes. Pako phases in, and Ashani untaps. During his upkeep, Ashani loses his mana crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an Arid Mesa from exile through Haldan. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts Imperial Seal from exile. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. Then Ashani fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He moves to combat and attacks Nick with Pako. Pako triggers, exiling Capture of Jingxiao, Silver Fur Master, Watery Grave, and a Worldly Tutor. Then Pako gets 3 counters. Then Nick takes it, and in its second main phase, Ashani casts Capture of Jingxiao from exile. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. In response, Sean taps his Ancient Tomb to help activate Tasigur. He mills Jeweled Lotus and Chrome Mox, and then Noah gives him Jeweled Lotus. Still in response, Noah casts Red Elemental Blast, targeting Capture. Channeler triggers, and Noah surveils Wheel of Fortune into his graveyard. In response, Ashani casts Force of Will from exile through Haldan, paying a life, and exiling a blue card, targeting Red Blast, paying the Rhystic tax. In response, Nick casts Misdirection for its alternate cost, exiling a blue card, targeting Force of Will. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. With no other answers, Misdirection resolves, changing the target of Force of Will to Capture of Jingxiao. Then Force counters Capture, and Red Blast fizzles. With nothing else, Ashani ends his turn. Nick draws and casts Imperial Seal, paying the Rhystic tax. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He moves to combat and attacks Ashani with Thousand-Faced Shadow. Ashani takes it, Yuriko triggers, and Nick reveals a Deadly Rollick into his hand with each opponent losing 4. In his second main phase, Nick casts a Soul Ring. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. Nick passes to Sean. Sean draws, and in his first main phase, he adds 1 black through his carpet. He activates Tasigur, milding Gilded Drake and Rhystic Study. Then Nick gives him Chrome Mox. He plays Beseju, who endures as his land for turn. Sean gives the turn to Noah. Noah draws and casts Brainstorm. Channeler triggers, and Noah surveils, leaving it on top. He then draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. He plays a Breeding Pool into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Mana Crypt. Channeler triggers, and he surveils, leaving it on top again. He moves to combat and attacks Nick with Channeler since it now has Delirium. Nick takes it, and Noah passes. At the end of Noah's turn, Nick casts Deadly Relic for its alternate cost, targeting Pako, paying the Rhystic tax. Pako is exiled, and the turn moves to Ashani. During his upkeep, Ashani wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and starts off his turn by casting Anger of the Gods. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. Anger resolves, killing and exiling most of the board. Next, Ashani casts a Felwar Stone, and Noah draws from Rhystic. He plays a Tropical Island from exile as his land for turn through Haldan. Ashani gives the turn to Nick. Nick draws and starts off his turn by hard casting his commander, Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. Nick passes. At the end of Nick's turn, Sean taps his Ancient Tomb to help activate Tasigur, milling Neoform and Teferi, Master of Time. Nick then gives him Demonic Consultation. The turn moves to Sean. Sean draws, and in his first main phase, he adds 2 black through his carpet. He casts Wishclaw Talisman, paying the Rhystic tax. Sean taps his Ancient Tomb and filters it into Simic Signet to help cast Thassa's Oracle, paying the Rhystic tax. Everyone jumps to attention, and in response, Noah casts Intuition. He fetches up an Underworld Breach, Savine's Reclamation, and a Force of Will. Ashani is forced to give him Force of Will due to the Oracle on the stack. Then, with no other answers, Thassa's Oracle resolves. Oracle triggers, and in response, Sean activates Wishclaw, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Nick. Sean casts Demonic Consultation. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. In response, Noah casts Force of Will, paying a life, exiling a blue card, countering Consultation. Then Oracle's trigger resolves, and Sean looks at the top two, putting one on top and the rest on bottom. Next, Sean casts Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing Tasigur as an additional cost. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. He fetches up a Nezahal, Primal Tide, onto the battlefield. He casts Chrome Mox, and Noah draws through Rhystic. Chrome Mox resolves, and Sean imprints March of Swirling Mist. Sean ends his turn. At the end of Sean's turn, Noah casts Resculpt, targeting Nezahal. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws. In response, Sean casts Stubborn Denial with Ferocious. Rhystic triggers, and Noah draws. Resculpt is countered, and the turn moves to Noah. During his upkeep, Noah wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and casts his commander, Omnath, Locus of Creation. It enters, and Noah draws. He plays a Windswept Heath for turn. Omnath triggers, and Noah gains 4 life. He cracks his Windswept Heath, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. Omnath triggers, and Noah adds 4 mana. He casts Finale of Devastation, where X equals 2. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws. In response, Nick casts Fierce Guardianship for its alternate cost, targeting Finale. Nezahal and Rhystic trigger, and Sean and Noah draw. In response, Noah casts Miscast, targeting Fierce. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws again. In response, Ashani casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Miscast, paying the Rhystic tax. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws. With nothing else, Swat resolves, redirecting Miscast to Finale of Devastation. Then Miscast counters Finale, and Fierce Guardianship fizzles. With nothing else, Noah passes. At the end of Noah's turn, Ashani casts Worldly Tutor from exile through Haldan. Nezahal and Rhystic trigger, and Sean and Noah draw. Then Ashani fetches up a Consecrated Sphinx onto the top of his library. The turn moves to Ashani. During his upkeep, Ashani wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and casts Dockside Extortionist, paying the Rhystic tax. It enters, and Ashani creates 9 treasures. He casts Consecrated Sphinx, paying the Rhystic tax again. He plays a Watery Grave from exile through Haldan into play untapped, paying 2 life. He recasts its commander, Pako, Arcane Retriever. Rhystic triggers, and Noah declines to draw due to Consecrated Sphinx. Ashani moves to combat and attacks Noah with Pako. Pako triggers, exiling Tarnished Citadel, Blinkmoth Infusion, Abrupt Decay, and Eladamri's Call. Then Pako gets 4 counters. Then Noah takes it, and Ashani ships the turn to Nick. Nick draws, Consecrated Sphinx triggers, and Ashani draws 2. In his main phase, Nick activates Wishclaw Talisman, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Sean. He moves to combat and attacks Ashani with Yuriko. Ashani declares no blocks, and in response, Nick ninjutsus in Sakashima's Student, bouncing Yuriko to his hand. Sakashima's Student enters as a copy of Dockside. Dockside triggers, and Nick creates 10 treasures. Still in combat, and since Dockside is unblocked, Nick ninjutsus in his commander, Yuriko the Tiger Shadow, bouncing Sakashima's Student back to his hand. Nick presents a loop of bouncing each one back to his hand, having Student enter as a copy of Dockside, creating more and more treasures each time. He does this until he has a massive amount of treasures and stops the loop with Yuriko attacking Ashani. Ashani takes it, Yuriko triggers, and Nick reveals a City of Brass into his hand. In his second main phase, Nick casts Draco. He casts Prosperous Thief. He casts Sakashima's Student. It enters as a copy of Draco. He plays a City of Brass for turn. Unfortunately, he does not have the outlet he needs to win with his treasures and passes the turn to Sean. Sean draws, Sphinx triggers, and Ashani draws 2. In his first main phase, Sean adds 3 blue through his carpet. He plays a Mana Confluence for turn. He casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks his Lotus and delves away some of his graveyard to help recast his commander, Tasigur the Golden Fang. He channels Takanuma, Abandoned Mire, milling 4, and returning Gilded Drake to his hand. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help activate Wishclaw, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Ashani. He casts Seedborn Muse. Rhystic triggers, and Ashani reasons with Noah to not ignore the trigger so that they can each draw into interaction through Consecrated Sphinx. Noah agrees, Rhystic resolves, but Sean pays. Then Seedborn resolves. Next, Sean casts Gilded Drake, paying the Rhystic tax. Gilded Drake enters and targets Consecrated Sphinx. In response, Ashani casts Abrupt Decay from exile through Haldan, targeting Gilded Drake. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws. Sphinx triggers, and Ashani draws 2. Rhystic triggers, and Noah declines to draw. Then Gilded Drake is destroyed, and the ability fizzles. With nothing else, Sean gives the turn to Noah. Sean untaps with Noah through Seedborn. During his upkeep, Noah loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws, Sphinx triggers, and Ashani draws 2. In his main phase, Noah casts Imperial Recruiter. It enters, and Noah fetches up a Dockside Extortionist into his hand. He plays a Flooded Strand for turn. Omnath triggers, and Noah gains 4 life. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. Omnath triggers, and Noah adds 4 mana. He casts Dockside Extortionist. In response, Sean activates Tasigur, milling Crop Rotation and Yawgmoth's Will. Nick gives him Force of Will. Then Sean taps his Ancient Tomb to hard cast Force of Will, paying the Rhystic tax, countering Dockside. Next, Noah flashes back Savine's Reclamation, targeting Underworld Breach. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws. Sphinx triggers, and Ashani draws 2. In response, Sean exiles Elvish Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a green. He casts Dramatic Reversal. In response, Noah casts Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Reversal. Nezahal triggers, and Sean draws. Sphinx triggers and Ashani draws 2. Then Flusterstorm counters Reversal and Zavine's resolves. Noah returns Underworld Breach to the battlefield and he copies Zavine's Reclamation. It resolves and Noah returns Dockside Extortionist to the battlefield. Dockside enters and, in response, Nick sacrifices all of his treasures floating mana. Then Noah creates 11 treasures. Noah escapes Swords to Plowshares targeting Nezahal. Nezahal triggers and Sean draws. Sphinx triggers and Ashani draws 2. In response, Sean activates Nezahal, discarding 3 cards, exiling Nezahal until the end of turn. Then Swords fizzles. Next, Noah escapes Swords to Plowshares again, targeting Consecrated Sphinx. Sphinx is exiled and Ashani gains 4 life. Noah escapes Enlightened Tutor. He fetches up a Lion's Eye Diamond onto the top of his library. He escapes Wheel of Fortune. In response, Ashani casts Mindbreak Trap for its alternate cost, targeting Wheel of Fortune. In response, Noah escapes Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Trap. Flusterstorm counters Trap and Wheel resolves. Each player discards their hand and draws 7. Noah casts LED. In response, Nick uses some of his floating mana to cast Consign, targeting Underworld Breach. In response, Noah escapes Red Elemental Blast, countering Consign. Noah attempts to move to combat to force Nick to fizzle his mana. In response, Nick hard casts Dismember, killing Omnath. Then Noah moves to his second main phase. He casts Mox Diamond, discarding Command Tower. He cracks his LED, discards his hand, and adds 3 red. He escapes LED, then cracks it, adding 3 blue. He escapes Spellseeker. It enters, and Noah fetches up a Brain Freeze into his hand. He casts Brain Freeze, milling his entire library. He escapes LED, cracks it, and adds 3 blue. He escapes Brain Freeze 3 more times, milling out his opponents. Noah passes the turn, sacrificing Underworld Breach. One by one, each player attempts to draw from an empty library, loses, and Noah wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a fun game. Congrats to Noah on his win. Omnath is proving once again what a powerhouse it can be at the CEDH table. Noah had plenty of advantage, interaction, and tools he needed to win the game. He was able to execute his Breach combo and put this game to bed tonight. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.